The words children should never hear. On a quiet autumn evening, the Hayes household looked like the picture of an ordinary family life. The small suburban home sat peacefully beneath fading orange sunlight, its warm kitchen lights glowing softly through the windows. Inside, Eleanor Hayes stood at the stove, gently stirring a pot of soup while the aroma of garlic and herbs filled the air. For Eleanor, these quiet moments were precious. Cooking dinner for her children had become a small ritual of stability in a life that often felt fragile. Her daughter Olivia, 12 years old and perceptive beyond her age, sat at the dining table finishing her homework. Across from her, 9-year-old Lucas attempted to build a small model airplane while occasionally glancing toward the front door. They were waiting. They were always waiting. "Mom," Lucas asked quietly, twisting a tiny plastic wing between his fingers, "is Dad coming home tonight?" Eleanor forced a gentle smile. "Of course he is," she replied softly. "Your father just works very hard." The words felt rehearsed. She had said them so many times that even she no longer believed them. Moments later, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the silence. Lucas brightened instantly, jumping from his chair. "Here's Hay." But Olivia didn't look up. She had learned that excitement rarely lasted long when their father came home. The front door opened sharply. Daniel Hayes stepped inside, loosening his tie with a tired sigh. His expensive cologne mixed with the kitchen's warmth, creating an unfamiliar scent that Eleanor had begun to notice more frequently. He glanced around the house with a faint frown. "Soup again," he muttered. Eleanor turned calmly from the stove. "I thought it would be nice tonight." Daniel dropped his briefcase on the counter with a dull thud. "You thought wrong." The room fell quiet. Lucas slowly returned to his chair while Olivia kept her eyes on her notebook. Daniel poured himself a drink without asking about anyone's day. After a long sip, he looked toward the children. "You two should learn something early," he said casually. "In life, success matters. Ambition matters." His eyes drifted toward Eleanor. "Unfortunately, your mother never understood that." Eleanor's hand paused on the soup ladle. Lucas frowned. "Mom works all the time." Daniel chuckled dryly. "Cooking dinner isn't exactly success, son." Olivia finally looked up. "That's not fair." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." "She takes care of everything," Olivia said quietly but firmly. Eleanor stepped in quickly before the moment could escalate. "Dinner is ready," she said, placing bowls on the table. But Daniel had already lost interest in the conversation. His phone buzzed softly on the counter. He glanced at the screen. The faint smile that appeared on his face was subtle, but Eleanor noticed. She always noticed. Without a word, Daniel picked up the phone and walked into the hallway. His voice dropped into a low murmur. Lucas leaned toward his sister. Who was he talking to? Olivia shrugged, though her expression remained troubled. Across the kitchen, Eleanor pretended to focus on arranging the table, but her ears strained toward the hallway. She could only hear fragments. "Tomorrow night. Can't stay long. She won't suspect anything." A quiet ache settled in her chest, but Eleanor said nothing. Instead, she carried the soup to the table and gently placed the bowls in front of her children. Lucas tasted it and smiled. "It's really good, Mom." She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "Thank you, sweetheart." Daniel returned a moment later, slipping the phone back into his pocket. "I'm not staying long tonight," he announced. "Important meeting." Olivia stayed at him. "At night." Daniel shrugged. "That's how real business works." He grabbed his coat again. As he walked toward the door, he paused beside the children. "You both should work harder than your mother," he said lightly. "Otherwise you'll end up just like her." The door closed behind him before anyone could respond. For a moment, the house remained completely silent. Lucas looked confused. Why does Dad say things like that? Eleanor forced another calm smile, though her heart felt heavy. Sometimes people say things they don't mean. But Olivia wasn't convinced. She watched the closed door with quiet intensity. Across the table, Eleanor slowly sat down. She had grown used to Daniel's coldness over the years. What once felt like small cracks in their marriage had slowly widened into something impossible to ignore. Still, she had stayed. For the children. Outside, Daniel's car engine faded into the distance. And inside the quiet kitchen, Eleanor's phone suddenly rang. The number on the screen was unfamiliar. She hesitated before answering. "Hello." A calm, professional voice spoke from the other end. "Mrs. Eleanor Hayes." "Yes. My name is Mr. Carter. I'm calling regarding your father, Victor Langston." Eleanor's heart skipped. She hadn't heard that name in years. "I'm sorry to inform you," the lawyer continued gently, "but Mr. Langston passed away this morning." The room seemed to shrink around her. Lucas and Olivia watched their mother's face change. "There are important matters concerning his estate," Mr. Carter added. "You'll need to come tomorrow." Eleanor slowly lowered the phone after the call ended. Her father was gone, and with him, a chapter of her past she had spent years trying to forget. But what Eleanor didn't yet know was that the next chapter of her life was about to change everything. A fortune hidden in silence. The following morning arrived with a quiet heaviness that Eleanor Hayes could not shake. Sleep had barely touched her the night before. The news of her father's death lingered in her mind like a distant echo, bringing memories she had spent years carefully burying. Sunlight filtered gently through the kitchen window as she prepared breakfast for Olivia and Lucas. The familiar rhythm of pouring cereal and packing school lunches helped steady her thoughts, but an uneasy tension still rested beneath the surface. Olivia noticed it immediately. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked, watching Eleanor closely. Eleanor hesitated before answering. "I just have an important appointment today," she said softly, "after I drop you both at school." Lucas looked up from his toast. "Is it about Grandpa?" The question surprised her. She had mentioned her father only a few times over the years, always carefully avoiding details. "Yes," she admitted quietly. Neither child asked further questions, but Olivia's thoughtful gaze lingered on her mother as they finished breakfast. An hour later, Eleanor stood outside a tall glass building in the center of the city. The structure was sleek and imposing, its polished steel reflecting the morning sky. A golden plaque beside the entrance read, "Langston Global Holdings." Eleanor paused before stepping inside. It had been nearly 15 years since she last walked into one of her father's offices. At the time, she had chosen to leave everything behind: his wealth, his influence, and the demanding world that surrounded him. She had wanted something simple, something real, but now she stood once again at the threshold of the life she had abandoned. Inside the lobby, a receptionist greeted her politely before escorting her to a private conference room. The room was spacious yet quiet, its walls decorated with photographs of towering factories, cargo ships, and international offices. Evidence of an empire. Moments later, the door opened and a tall, gray-haired man stepped inside. "Mrs. Hayes," he said warmly. "I'm Mr. Carter." Eleanor stood and shook his hand. "Thank you for meeting with me." His expression carried both professionalism and sympathy. "Your father spoke about you often," he said as they sat across the large table. Eleanor found that difficult to believe. Victor Langston had always been a complicated man, brilliant, powerful, and distant. Their relationship had fractured years ago when Eleanor chose a life he believed was beneath her potential. She had married Daniel. She had chosen family over fortune. Mr. Carter slid a folder across the table. "Your father left very clear instructions regarding his estate," he explained. Eleanor opened the folder slowly. Inside were several legal documents, each stamped with official seals. Numbers filled the pages, figures so large they almost seemed unreal. Mr. Carter spoke carefully. Victor Langston was the sole owner of Langston Global Industries, including all its subsidiaries and international investments. Eleanor nodded quietly. She already knew the scale of her father's business. But the next words still left her breathless. "In his will," Mr. Carter continued, "he named you as the primary heir to the entire estate." Eleanor blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "The company, the holdings, and all associated assets," he clarified gently. "The total estimated value is approximately $30 billion. For a moment, Eleanor said nothing. The number hung in the air between them like an impossible truth. "Why?" she finally asked. Mr. Carter folded his hands thoughtfully. "Your father believed that character mattered more than ambition. When you chose to build a life without his wealth, he considered it proof of your integrity." Eleanor stayed down at the documents. Her mind struggled to reconcile the quiet life she had built with the enormous responsibility now placed before her. "There is one additional note," Mr. Carter added. He reached into the folder and pulled out a handwritten letter. "Your father asked that you read this privately." Eleanor accepted the envelope but did not open it yet. Instead, she asked the question that had quietly formed in her mind. "Did anyone else know about this?" Mr. Carter shook his head. "Very few people. Your father insisted that your identity remain confidential until today." Eleanor exhaled slowly. Daniel had never known. Throughout their entire marriage, he had believed she came from an ordinary background. She had never corrected that assumption because, at the time, it seemed unimportant. Now the irony felt almost overwhelming. While Daniel spent years mocking her lack of ambition, she had unknowingly been the heir to a fortune beyond his imagination. Across the city, at that very moment, Daniel Hayes sat in a luxurious restaurant booth across from a stylish woman named Sophie. He leaned back confidently in his chair. "You deserve someone more successful," Sophie said playfully. Daniel smirked. "Trust me," he replied, swirling his drink. "I'm working on it." Sophie tilted her head. "What about your wife?" Daniel shrugged without hesitation. "She wouldn't understand the life I'm building." He paused before adding with quiet arrogance, "She's never achieved anything." Meanwhile, inside the towering Langston headquarters, Eleanor Hayes finally opened the letter from her father. The first line was written in bold, steady handwriting. "My dear Eleanor, the world will soon see who you truly are." She looked out the tall window at the sprawling city below. For years, she had lived quietly in the background of other people's expectations. But now the truth was beginning to unfold, and Daniel Hayes had no idea that the woman he had spent years belittling had just become one of the most powerful women in the world. The moment the mask cracked, when Eleanor Hayes returned home that evening, the sky had already turned a deep shade of violet. The quiet suburban street looked unchanged, peaceful and familiar, as though nothing in the world had shifted. But Eleanor knew everything had. The folder containing the documents from Langston Global Industries rested inside her bag as she stepped through the front door. Its weight felt symbolic now, not just the weight of money or power, but the weight of truth. Inside the house, Olivia sat on the couch reading while Lucas watched television with quiet concentration. Both children looked up the moment Eleanor entered. "Mom," Lucas said, running over. "You're late today." Eleanor hugged him gently. "I had a lot to take care of." Olivia studied her face carefully. She had always been the observant one. "Did the meeting go okay?" she asked. Eleanor paused for a moment before answering. "Yes," she said softly. "It did." She wasn't ready to explain everything yet. The reality of her father's empire still felt too overwhelming to place into simple words. Instead, she moved into the kitchen and began preparing dinner. The house felt unusually calm, until the sound of Daniel's car pulling into the driveway shattered the quiet. Lucas instantly stiffened. Olivia sighed under her breath. The front door opened a moment later, and Daniel Hayes walked inside with his usual confident stride. His shirt was neatly pressed, and his expression carried the familiar air of superiority that had slowly become part of his personality. He tossed his keys onto the counter. "Long day," he muttered. Eleanor glanced up briefly. "Dinner will be ready soon." Daniel looked around the kitchen. "Still doing the same routine. I see." His tone was light, but the dismissiveness behind it was unmistakable. Lucas shifted uncomfortably at the table. Olivia rolled her eyes slightly. Daniel poured himself another drink before leaning casually against the counter. "You know," he said to the children, "there's a big world out there. Opportunities. Real success." His eyes drifted toward Eleanor. "But you have to be ambitious enough to chase it." Eleanor continued chopping vegetables, her movements steady and calm. For the first time in years, Daniel's words barely affected her, because now she understood something he didn't. His arrogance came from ignorance. Olivia finally spoke. "Why do you always say things like that about Mom?" Daniel smirked. "I'm just teaching you reality." Lucas frowned. "Mom works really hard." Daniel laughed quietly. "That's not the kind of work that changes the world, son." The room fell silent again. Eleanor finished preparing the meal and set the plates on the table without responding. But something inside her had changed. The insults that once stung now felt strangely distant, because she knew something Daniel didn't. And soon, the truth would become impossible for him to ignore. Dinner passed with minimal conversation. Daniel seemed distracted, frequently checking his phone beneath the table. At one point, a message appeared on his screen that made him smile. Eleanor noticed. After years of marriage, she had learned to read even the smallest shifts in his behavior. Later that night, while Daniel showered upstairs, his phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. Eleanor had no intention of touching it. But the screen lit up again. A message appeared. "Sophie, I can't wait to see you tomorrow night." Eleanor froze. Her eyes lingered on the screen as the meaning slowly settled into place. Another message followed seconds later. "Sophie, are you finally going to tell her?" The quiet kitchen suddenly felt colder. For a long moment, Eleanor simply stood there. Then she placed the phone exactly where it had been and stepped away. When Daniel returned downstairs, she was calmly washing dishes. He glanced at her briefly. "You look tired," he said casually. "Maybe you should rest more." Eleanor dried her hands slowly. "Maybe," she replied. But her voice was different now. Quieter, steadier. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, Eleanor sat alone at the kitchen table with a folder from Langston Industries. Inside were the documents confirming her inheritance. $30 billion. Ownership of a global empire. The same woman Daniel had spent years calling unambitious had unknowingly become one of the most powerful individuals in the corporate world. Eleanor closed the folder gently. She thought about her children. She thought about the years she had spent trying to hold their family together. And she thought about the message she had seen on Daniel's phone. For the first time in a long while, Eleanor felt something unexpected rise within her. Not sadness, not anger, but clarity. Upstairs, Daniel Hayes slept peacefully, unaware that the foundation of his carefully constructed life had already begun to crumble. Because very soon, he would discover two truths he had never anticipated. That his wife knew about his betrayal, and that the woman he believed was ordinary now owned an empire capable of destroying everything he had built. The truth he never saw coming. The following evening carried an unusual stillness inside the Hayes household. The air felt heavy with unspoken tension, though only one person fully understood why. Eleanor Hayes moved quietly through the kitchen, setting the dinner table with her usual calm precision. The soft clinking of plates and glasses filled the silence as Olivia and Lucas sat nearby finishing their homework. To them, it felt like an ordinary night. But Eleanor knew it was anything but ordinary. Across the room, the folder containing the documents from Langston Global Industries rested neatly on the counter. She had looked through it several times since returning from the meeting with Mr. Carter, and each time the reality felt more surreal. $30 billion. A global empire. Responsibility that stretched far beyond anything she had imagined for her life. Yet strangely, the knowledge did not overwhelm her. Instead, it gave her a quiet sense of strength. The front door opened suddenly, breaking the silence. Daniel Hayes stepped inside, his movements brisk and confident as always. He hung his coat by the door and glanced briefly toward the kitchen. "Dinner ready?" he asked. "Almost," Eleanor replied calmly. Daniel loosened his tie and walked into the room, barely acknowledging the children before pouring himself a drink. Olivia noticed. She always did. Lucas looked up from his math worksheet. "Dad, are you staying tonight?" Daniel shrugged. "Depends on work." The answer sounded automatic, rehearsed. Eleanor placed the final dish on the table. "Let's eat." They sat together, though the atmosphere felt unusually tense. Halfway through the meal, Daniel leaned back in his chair and glanced toward his children with the same familiar expression of casual authority. "You know," he began, "success comes from making smart decisions in life." Olivia exchanged a quick glance with her mother. Daniel continued, gesturing slightly toward Eleanor. "For example, you should never settle for mediocrity." Lucas frowned. "What does that mean?" Daniel smirked lightly. "It means you shouldn't follow your mother's example." The words hung in the air like a quiet explosion. Olivia immediately set down her fork. "That's not fair." Daniel raised an eyebrow. Excuse me. You always say things like that about Mom, she said firmly. Why? For a moment, Daniel seemed amused by the challenge. I'm just telling the truth, he replied casually. Your mother never aimed very high in life. Eleanor watched him silently. For years she had endured comments like this without responding. She had convinced herself that maintaining peace for the children mattered more than defending her pride. But tonight was different. Tonight, the truth sat waiting on the kitchen counter. She slowly placed her napkin beside her plate. Daniel, she said calmly. He looked at her with mild impatience. Yes, I think it's time we talk. Daniel leaned back, unimpressed. If this is about my schedule again, I'm really not in the mood. It's not about your schedule. Something in Eleanor's tone made him pause. The children sensed it too. Eleanor stood and walked toward the counter. She picked up the folder and returned to the table. Daniel glanced at it briefly. What's that? Something important, she replied. She placed the folder in front of him and opened it. Daniel looked down at the documents, clearly confused. What am I looking at? Eleanor folded her hands together. Those are the legal papers for Langston Global Industries. Daniel blinked. So, it's the company my father built. Daniel frowned slightly. Your father? He had heard the name Victor Langston only once or twice over the years, and Eleanor had never elaborated. Eleanor spoke calmly. My father passed away yesterday. Daniel shrugged lightly. I didn't even know he was sick. Eleanor ignored the remark. He left his entire estate to me. Daniel looked back down at the documents. The numbers slowly registered in his mind. Assets, corporate ownership, investment portfolios, and one final figure printed clearly at the bottom of the page. Estimated value, $30 billion. Daniel's expression shifted. That can't be right. Eleanor met his eyes. It is. The kitchen fell completely silent. Olivia and Lucas watched their parents with wide eyes. Daniel laughed awkwardly. Wait, are you saying? Yes, Eleanor interrupted gently. I'm now the owner of Langston Global Industries. Daniel stared at her, trying to process what he had just heard. The same woman he had spent years mocking. The woman he had just called mediocre in front of their children. Now controlled a $30 billion empire. His confidence evaporated almost instantly. That's impossible, he muttered. Eleanor's voice remained steady. There's something else you should know. Daniel looked up slowly. I saw the messages on your phone, she said. The color drained from his face. Sophie, Eleanor added quietly. For a moment, Daniel couldn't speak. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Every careless word he had spoken over the years now seemed to echo back at him. Eleanor stood calmly from the table. I spent a long time trying to protect this family, she said softly. But I won't allow you to disrespect me in front of our children anymore. Olivia walked around the table and stood beside her mother. Lucas followed. Daniel remained frozen in his chair, surrounded by the weight of truths he had never expected to face. For the first time in their entire marriage, he realized something that should have been obvious all along. The woman he had always underestimated had been the strongest person in the room.